Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. She didn't go there looking for the truth, but the truth found her anyway. And what she walked in on didn't just break her heart, it broke her entire reality. Okay, so here is the situation, and I need you to really feel this one with me. Electra wasn't even supposed to be there that day. She came back early, no warning, no announcement, just a woman trying to steal a quiet moment after a week that had completely wrung her out. And instead of the peace she was looking for, she found something that no amount of mental preparation could have softened. She saw RJ, the man she had trusted with everything, in a moment with another woman that didn't need an explanation. It was written in every gesture, every glance, every inch of space, or lack of it, between them. And what happened next? Electra didn't explode. She didn't fall apart in front of him. She delivered six words with a calm so controlled it was almost frightening, turned around, and walked out. But what happened after the door closed, both for her and for RJ, is the part of the story that is really going to stay with you. Let me take you all the way back to the beginning of this. Because context matters here, and I want you to fully understand what Electra was carrying before she even walked through that door. This wasn't a woman who had been carelessly inattentive in her relationship. This was someone who had actively chosen to love RJ through her doubts. Because here is the honest truth, the signs had been there, they have been quietly accumulating for weeks. Late nights, conversations where his mind seemed to be somewhere else entirely, and there was this particular thing that had been nagging at her, the way his voice changed when he mentioned a certain someone, the subtle, almost tender shift in his tone that felt out of place and wrong in a way she couldn't fully articulate, but couldn't fully ignore either. And yet, Electra had made a decision. She had looked at all of those little warning signals and chosen to trust anyway, telling herself that doubt was dangerous, that real love required you to extend faith even when your gut was quietly screaming at you. She had convinced herself that the alternative, giving in to suspicion, would poison everything good they had built together. So she pushed it all down. She chose him over and over again. She chose him. And then she came home early one afternoon, just trying to breathe for a moment after a week that had stretched her thin, and everything she had chosen to ignore came rushing up to meet her all at once. She was approaching the office when she heard it, laughter, and I want to understand that it wasn't just any laughter. It wasn't the kind you hear when co-workers are sharing a funny story or colleagues are blowing off steam. This was something else, something quieter and more intimate. The kind of laughter that exists in its own private universe, that signals a closeness you only develop when you have spent significant time being completely comfortable with another person. Electra's hand actually stopped moving before she could even process why. She was inches from the door handle and her body just froze because some part of her already knew. Before she saw anything, before she had any visual confirmation, something in her chest had already started to collapse. She pushed the door open, slowly, barely, just enough to see inside. And I think about this detail a lot. The way she didn't throw it open, the way she eased it forward like she was both desperate to know and terrified of knowing at the same time. That is such a human heartbreaking impulse. And what she saw on the other side of the door was not a dramatic, undeniable scene of obvious betrayal. And in some ways, that made it worse. RJ was standing at the design table with this woman, and the physical closeness between them was immediate and unmistakable. Their hands were touching, and not in a casual, accidental way. It was the kind of contact that lingers, that has meaning, that neither person is in hurry to end. They were looking at each other in that way that people who share something unspoken do, communicating entire volumes without a single word passing between them. And then RJ began to lean in, and Electra's breath just stopped. It wasn't a kiss, it stopped just short of one. But I want to say something about that, because I think this is so important. The fact that it wasn't technically a kiss did not make it less of a betrayal. It was every single thing that exists in the space before a kiss. All of the emotional intimacy, all of the desire, all of the connection. The physical act would have just been the punctuation on a sentence that was already devastatingly complete. And Electra understood that immediately in her bones. She understood it, that ambiguity, that almost was somehow more painful than something unambiguous would have been, because it was undeniable in its intent while being just deniable enough that she knew he would try to talk his way around it. Here is what I find most remarkable about Electra in this moment though. She didn't make a sound. She didn't gasp, didn't cry out, didn't burst through that door demanding to know what was happening. She stood completely still, her body absorbing the impact of what she was witnessing like it was a physical blow, shaking but silent. The betrayal in front of her wasn't noisy or theatrical. It was quiet and intimate and real. And somehow that particular combination of qualities made it cut so much deeper than something loud ever could have. And while she stood there in that frozen, devastating moment, her mind started doing that thing that minds do when they are trying to process something they can't accept. It started replaying everything, every promise RJ had ever made her, every smile, every moment of tenderness, every time he had told her he loved her, and all of it was running through her head simultaneously, not like a warm collection of memories but like shards of something broken. Because the scene in front of her was recontextualizing every single one of those moments. She had trusted him completely. She had organized her entire vision of the future around him. She had believed, deeply and genuinely believed, in what they were building together, and standing in that hallway, watching him lean toward another woman with that particular softness in his posture. She could see with brutal clarity that the story she had been telling herself about their relationship was not the whole story. The door creaked just slightly, the smallest sound, but it was enough. The atmosphere in that room shattered instantly. Arj's head snapped toward the door, and his expression underwent this immediate, wrenching transformation. All that warmth and closeness dissolving into shock in a single second. He said her name, just her name, and before he could add anything to it, Electra spoke, 6 words calm, quiet, utterly precise. She told him not to lie to her because she had seen everything, and I need to talk about the delivery of those 6 words because it is everything. She didn't scream them, she didn't cry them, she didn't say them with trembling rage or hysterical pain. She said them with this terrifying steadiness, this composed and controlled quiet that actually communicated for far more devastation than any emotional outburst could have, because that kind of calm, the calm that comes when a person is so deeply broken that they have temporarily gone beyond tears, is one of the most heartbreaking things you can witness in another human being. It wasn't strength in the traditional sense, it was the eerie stillness of someone whose world has just fundamentally ended. The room went completely silent. RJ immediately started trying to reframe it, telling her it wasn't what she was thinking, and Electra stopped him with something even more powerful than words, a single look, and then she told him quietly and with complete conviction not to do that, not to insult her intelligence by pretending she hadn't seen what she had clearly seen with her own eyes. The other woman in the room was visibly uncomfortable, clearly understanding that she had become an unwilling witness to something deeply private and painful. But Electra didn't even spare her a glance. Her entire focus was on RJ, this man who now felt inexplicably like a stranger wearing a familiar face. She asked him in this voice that was steady but unmistakably aging. Whether he had ever intended to tell her, and RJ hesitated. He paused before answering, and that pause, that single beat of hesitation, told Electra more than any answer he could have given. She didn't need to hear the words. The hesitation was the answer, and she responded to it with this short, almost disbelieving laugh that was so laden with pain it barely sounded like laughter at all. She said she had actually believed they were building something genuine together all this time. RJ rushed to insist that they were, that they are, that it's complicated, and that word complicated was the match that finally lit the fire in her. Because she looked at him and told him clearly, "No, it's not complicated at all. You deceived me. You betrayed my trust. That is not complicated. That is a choice you made." And every word landed with the weight of absolute truth because she was right. None of what he had done to her was complicated. It was a series of deliberate decisions made over time, each one a fresh, small act of betrayal against someone who had given him her whole heart. RJ moved toward her, desperate, asking her to just let him explain. And Electra stepped back. That single backward step said everything that needed to be said. She told him she had no interest in his explanations, because no version of the story he could construct would change what she had seen. And more importantly, nothing he could say would change the way it felt. And her voice cracked just slightly on that last word. Felt, and in that tiny fracture in her composure, all of the genuine devastation she had been holding at bay briefly surfaced. Her eyes filled with tears she absolutely refused to let fall, not there, not in front of him. She went on, her voice softer now, but no less powerful, telling him what he had done to her, that he had made her feel like a fool. She asked him if he understood what that actually does to a person, to give someone your complete and unconditional trust and then discover that you were the only one in the relationship operating with honesty. RJ's face twisted with something that looked like genuine pain, and he told her that he cared about her. And she came right back with the most precise response, that you don't treat someone this way if you actually care about them. There is nothing complicated or ambiguous about that. Care and deception cannot truly coexist. There was a moment where it seemed like RJ might finally say something real and meaningful, like he was on the edge of some words that might actually matter, but they never came. And I wonder if Electra had already sensed that they wouldn't, that maybe there simply weren't words capable of doing what would need to be done in that room. So she took a breath, steadied herself, and said the most important thing she said in that entire confrontation. She said she deserved better than this. And I want to sit with those five words for just a moment. Because they are not dramatic, they are not theatrical or loud, or designed to wound. They are just quietly, entirely true. It wasn't a performance, it was a reckoning. A woman standing in the middle of her own devastation and choosing to recognize her own value out loud. It was the most powerful thing she could possibly have said in that moment. And I think somewhere beneath his guilt and his regret, RJ knew it. His whole body seemed to sag under the weight of those words. He asked her not to leave like this, and she looked at him with this expression that was somehow both heartbroken and almost gentle, a look that held no anger left, only the profound sadness of something irreversibly lost. And she told him that he had already gone, that she just hadn't realized it until now. And then she turned, and she walked toward the door. Every single step felt heavy, like she was walking around through resistance, like the room itself was trying to hold her back. She didn't turn around. She didn't give him that final look back that might have broken her completely open. She kept walking, and the door closed behind her. And the sound of it was like an ending, like the last note of something that had been beautiful once, out in the hallway away from his eyes. Electra finally began to come apart. The composer she had held together so precisely in that room started to give way the moment she was alone, and she had to press her hand against the wall just to stay upright. Her throat was burning, her chest was tight, and the tears she had refused to shed in front of him finally came. But even then, even in the middle of that private collapse, she didn't fully fall. She stayed on her feet. She let herself feel it, and then she straightened up, wiped her face, and kept moving. Back inside the office, Archie stood perfectly still, staring at the closed door, like he was waiting for her to come back through it. The silence she had left behind was louder than anything she could have said, the other women gently suggested he go after her. And Arya was quiet for a long moment before he finally admitted, in a low and regretful voice, that he didn't think Electra wanted to see him right now. And in saying that, he was acknowledging something huge, that this wasn't a small thing that could be smoothed over with the right words. This was a fracture, deep and structural and real. Meanwhile, Electra stepped out of the building and into the sunlight, and there was something almost symbolic about that. Walking from the darkness of that discovery out into the open air, she stood there and breathed, and for the first time began to process something that she had been quietly denying herself for a long time. She had been allowing her sense of happiness and her sense of self to be entirely tangled up in her relationship with RJ. In their shared plans, their common vision, the identity she had built around being with him, and stripped of all of that in the span of a single afternoon, she realized something quietly staggering. There was more to her than any of that. More than that relationship, more than that love, more than that betrayal, and though the moment was soaked in pain, there was something else in it too, something unexpected and fragile but real, a sense of release, because at least now she knew, at least the uncertainty was over. She whispered to herself with tears still on her lashes that she deserved honesty, and she deserved someone who chose her, not sometimes, not when it was convenient, but consistently and completely. And that wasn't just something she was saying to feel better, that was a promise she was making to herself. What this storyline is really doing, underneath all that heartbreak and drama, is telling a story about something so many people recognize from their own lives. The moment you realize the version of a relationship you believed in and the reality of that relationship were two different things. That gap between belief and truth is where Electra has been living, and having it close this abruptly and this painfully is genuinely destabilizing. The emotional consequences here are layered. There is the obvious devastation of betrayal, but there is also the deeper, more complicated grief of having to go back and re examine everything. All those moments of genuine happiness, and wonder how much of it was real. That is a specific and brutal kind of pain. And this story is honoring it with real depth. The moment where Electra stands outside in the sunlight and begins to reclaim her own identity separate from RJ. That is where this stops being just a betrayal storyline and starts being something genuinely meaningful about a woman discovering herself, and that is a story worth watching very closely. Honestly, Electra handled this with a level of grace and self possession that I deeply respect, especially given how devastating the circumstances were. Those 6 words she delivered, the way she said them, that was not a woman who had lost herself. That was a woman who, in the worst moment, found herself. And I think that is the real story here. Arj's guilt and regret are understandable. And I don't think this show is asking us to simply write him off as a villain. But he needs to sit with the full weight of what he chose and what it cost. The woman who walked out of that office is not the same woman who walked in. And whether or not RJ ever fully understands that difference is going to determine everything about what comes next for both of them. So here is where Electra stands. She walked into that building carrying the weight of quiet doubts she had been refusing to acknowledge. And she walked out carrying something harder but cleaner, the truth, and the beginning of a promise she made to herself. RJ is left standing in the wreckage of his own choices, staring at a closed door, and the silence she left behind is doing all the talking. This story is absolutely far from over, and if I know this show, the chapters ahead are going to be even more intense than what we just witnessed. Now, I really want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Electra made the right call walking out the way she did? Or should she have pushed for a fuller conversation? Do you believe RJ is genuinely remorseful, or is this just what guilt looks like before someone finds a new excuse? And that moment in the hallway where Electra finally lets herself cry, but still doesn't fully fall apart. Did that hit you as hard as it hit me? Tell me everything you are thinking below because I genuinely love reading your perspectives on this. If you are not already subscribed, please hit that button right now. This is the channel where we broke down every emotional turning point, every jaw dropping scene, and every quiet moment that changes everything. Hit that thumbs up if this video had you feeling all of it, and I will see you in the very next one.